The ship descended through the prison planet's thick atmosphere, its sleek hull cutting through layers of metallic gray clouds. Omega-9 stood as a massive structure, half buried in the rocky terrain of a world that seemed designed to crush hope. The facility was more than just a prison. It was a statement. No one escaped. No one survived long enough to even try. Jack Miller sat quietly in the transport vessel, his hands locked in energy-restraining cuffs. Around him, 3 guards from different alien species watched him carefully. Each guard represented a different galactic civilization, each chosen for their ability to remain calm and professional under extreme conditions. The first guard was Kai, a tall blue-skinned being from the Aquarian system. His multiple eyes, 4 in total, constantly scanned Jack, looking for any potential threat. The second was a rock-like creature named Doran, from a planet of silicon-based life forms. His body looked like living stone, with cracks that glowed with an inner light. The third was a slender, almost transparent creature named Lyra, whose species communicated through color changes and subtle body movements. Prisoner transfer to maximum security zone. Kai spoke into his communication device. His voice was deep and mechanical, translated perfectly through the ship's communication system. Jack did not move. He did not speak. He simply sat, looking out the small window at the approaching prison. The landscape was brutal. Sharp rocks, no vegetation, constant wind that carried particles of gray dust. It looked like a place where hope would die quickly. The ship landed with a soft hum. External scanners began their routine checks. Every inch of the transport was examined for potential weapons, hidden technology, or any means of escape. But Jack carried nothing. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, standard issue for prisoners being transferred between galactic jurisdictions. Warden Jae-hoon watched from the main control room. He was human, one of the few humans working in the galactic judicial system. His job was to manage Omega-9, a prison designed to hold the most dangerous criminals from across multiple star systems. The facility had never had a successful escape. Not one. "Prepare processing," Jae-hoon commanded. His voice was calm, professional. Years of working in the most secure prison in the known galaxy had taught him to remain detached. The transport doors opened with a soft hiss. Kai stepped out first, scanning the environment. Doran followed, his rocky body moving with surprising grace. Lyra came last, her transparent form shifting colors, a sign of alert readiness. Jack Miller walked out, surrounded by the 3 guards. He was not tall. He was not short. He looked completely average. Nothing about him suggested he was anything special, and yet something about his calm demeanor made the guards slightly uncomfortable. "Prisoner 24,601, the processing officer announced. He was a tall bureaucratic alien with 6 eyes and skin that looked like polished metal. Sentenced to perpetual containment for diplomatic destabilization and multiple counts of interstellar disruption. Jack looked at the processing officer, and he smiled. It was not a threatening smile. It was not a sad smile. It was simply a smile. A smile that seemed to hold something more, something that the processing officer could not quite understand. As Jack was led deeper into Omega-9, the prison that no one had ever escaped from, something subtle began to change. None of the guards noticed it yet. But something was different. Very different. The cell was nothing like what most people would imagine. It was not dark or dirty. Instead, it was clean, bright, and totally empty. White walls curved smoothly, with no corners where a prisoner might hide anything. A single metal bench was attached to the floor. The ceiling had small lights that never went out, creating a constant, soft glow. Jack Miller sat on the bench. He did not move much. He did not look troubled. He simply existed in the space, calm and quiet. In the control room, guard Min-ki watched through multiple screens. He was young for a prison guard, only in his 3rd year of service. His job was to monitor the prisoners, especially new arrivals like Jack Miller. The system showed every detail: Jack's breathing rate, body temperature, muscle movements, even the electrical activity in his brain. Nothing unusual. Min-Ki spoke into his communication device, but something felt strange. Jack kept smiling. Not a big smile, just a small, calm smile that seemed to sit quietly on his face. The prison was built on a planet with no natural light. Outside the thick walls, nothing grew. Nothing lived. The ground was hard rock, and the sky was always a mix of gray and darker gray. Wind blew tiny sharp stones across the empty landscape. No bird would fly here. No plant would grow here. This was a place designed to keep things locked away. Omega-9 had sections for different types of prisoners. Some areas held creatures that needed special environmental controls. Some held prisoners who could not be near each other. Some held prisoners who were so dangerous that they needed constant monitoring. Jack was in the highest security section. This meant extra cameras, extra sensors, extra everything. Min-Ki checked the readings again. Everything was normal. Completely normal. And yet, something felt different. The other guards started to notice something too. Small things. Tiny changes. Guard Sung-Ho, who had worked at Omega-9 for 15 years, felt something first during his evening patrol. He passed Jack's cell. Jack was still sitting on the bench, still smiling that small smile. And for just a moment, Sung-Ho felt something strange. A tiny feeling, almost like he wanted to smile too. He shook his head, pushed the feeling away. In the medical monitoring room, Dr. Park looked at the brain scans. Jack's brain showed completely normal activity. Nothing special, nothing strange. But something was happening. Jack continued to sit, continued to exist, continued to smile. The prison was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people feel nervous. Min-Ki watched the screens. He blinked. For just a second, he felt like smiling. He didn't understand why. Jack Miller had been in the prison for less than 12 hours. But something was changing. Slowly, quietly, like water wearing away a stone. The cameras kept recording. The sensors kept measuring. The guards kept watching. And Jack kept smiling. Just a small smile. A smile that seemed to hold something more than anyone could understand. The first night in Omega-9 continued. Quiet. Calm. Almost peaceful. But something was different. Very different. By the third day, something was changing in Omega-9. At first, no one could explain it. The change was so small that most people didn't notice, but it was there. Warden Jae-hoon first heard about it during the morning staff meeting. The reports seemed strange. Guards were reporting odd feelings. Nothing big, just small things. "We've noticed some changes in staff behavior," reported senior guard Hyunwoo. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to say too much. "What kind of changes?" Jae-hoon asked. Hyunwoo shifted in his seat. "The guards are happier, more relaxed. It's weird. In most prisons, this might not sound like a problem. But Omega-9 was not most prisons. Here, guards were trained to be tough, cold, always alert. Happiness was not part of the job description." Jack Miller remained in his cell. He continued to sit on the metal bench. He continued to smile. That small smile. The medical team started to investigate. Dr. Park ran every test she could think of. Brain scans, blood tests, psychological evaluations. Nothing showed anything unusual about Jack Miller. But something was happening. In the prison cafeteria, guards began to notice small changes. They started to talk more, laugh more, share stories. This was not normal for Omega-9. Guard Min-Ki first noticed it during lunch. He sat with Sung-Ho, and they started talking, really talking, about their families, their dreams, their hopes. They had worked together for years, but they had never really talked before. "Do you feel different?" Min-Ki asked. Sung-Ho paused. Then he smiled. "I feel good," he said. In the high-security monitoring room, the cameras kept watching Jack Miller. He sat in his cell, quiet, calm, that small smile never leaving his face. The prison had rules, strict rules. Every movement was watched. Every sound was recorded. Nothing happened without someone knowing about it. But something was happening. Dr. Park brought her findings to Warden Jahoon. "There's nothing medically wrong," she reported, "but something is changing." Jack Miller had been in the prison for 3 days. Just 3 days. In the cells near Jack, prisoners began to notice changes too. The guards were different. More human. More kind. Not soft. Just different. A prisoner named Lee, who had been in Omega 9 for 10 years, noticed it first. The guards used to walk past without looking. Now they sometimes made eye contact. Sometimes even said hello. "Something is happening," Lee told his cellmate. The cellmate nodded. "Something is changing." Outside, the prison planet remained the same. Gray rocks, gray sky, sharp wind. Nothing changed out there. But inside Omega 9, everything was different. Warden Jahoon called an emergency meeting. The top staff gathered. They discussed the changes. Nobody had an explanation. "We need to watch the human," Jahoon said. "Something is happening." Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell, quiet, calm. That small smile, a smile that seemed to hold something more than anyone could understand. The 3rd day in Omega 9 ended, but something had started. Something that nobody could explain. Something was spreading. Slowly, quietly, like a light growing in a dark room. The Interstellar Judicial Council did not like mysteries. They liked problems that could be solved, explained, controlled. Jack Miller was becoming a problem they could not understand. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived at Omega 9. She was the top psychological expert in the galactic system. Her job was to find out what was happening. She had solved problems that no one else could solve. She had studied mind patterns from 100 different alien species. But Jack Miller was different. When she first saw him, he was still sitting in the same cell, still wearing the same gray prison clothes, still wearing that small smile. "Tell me about yourself," she said through the translation device. Jack looked at her. "Nothing much to tell," he said. The monitoring room was full of experts. Warden Jahoon watched. Dr. Park stood nearby. Senior guards waited for any sign of trouble. Dr. Rodriguez asked more questions. Jack answered simply. He talked about his childhood, about growing up on Earth, about working as a simple cargo ship maintenance worker before his arrest. Nothing seemed special, but something was happening in the prison. The guards were changing. Not in a big way. In small ways. They smiled more. They talked more. They seemed more human. "We need to understand," Warden Jahoon said. "What is happening?" Dr. Rodriguez ran tests. Brain scans showed nothing unusual. Psychological evaluations came back normal. Blood tests revealed no strange chemicals, no hidden technologies. Jack Miller was just a normal human. Or was he? In the prison cafeteria, something strange was happening. Guards who used to eat alone now sat together. They shared food. They told stories. They laughed. Prisoners noticed the change too. "The guards are different," said an old prisoner named Kim. 1 week passed, and everything was different. The numbers were clear. But numbers did not tell the whole story. 73% of the prison staff had changed. Not in a big way. In small ways that added up to something bigger. The medical team called it the Miller effect. They could not explain it, but they could measure it. Guards laughed more. They talked more. They seemed more alive. Prisoners noticed first. Then the staff noticed. Then the outside world started to hear rumors. "Something is happening in Omega 9, people said. Jack Miller remained in his cell, sitting, watching, smiling. That small smile. Dr. Park created charts, graphs, lists of changes. She tracked everything she could track. Staff happiness increased by 62%. Conflict rates dropped by 55%. Communication between guards and prisoners improved by 47%. Numbers: cold, hard, simple. But they did not show the whole picture. In the prison yard, something strange happened. Prisoners who used to fight now talked. Guards who used to be strict now listened. An old prisoner named Lee told a story about his family. A guard named Min Ki listened, really listened. "I have a son," Min Ki said. "I never talked about him before." Prisoners looked at each other. Something was changing. The outside world started to hear rumors. Omega 9 was different. The most secure prison in the galaxy was becoming something else. No one could explain how. Jack Miller just sat in his cell. Quiet, calm, smiling. Dr. Elena Rodriguez continued her research. She interviewed everyone, looked at everything, checked every possible reason for the changes. "It makes no sense," she told Warden Jahoon. "Tell me something I don't know," he replied. The Interstellar Judicial Council was worried. A prison was not supposed to change. A prison was supposed to stay the same. Controlled, quiet, strict. Omega 9 was becoming something else. The changes were small at first. Then they got bigger. Guards started to help prisoners learn new skills. They offered classes. They talked about hopes, dreams. A prisoner named Kim learned to read. Another learned math. A third started to draw. "We never did this before," the senior guard said. Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell, watching, waiting, smiling. The prison cameras recorded everything, but they could not explain what was happening. Warden Jahoon called more meetings. More experts came. They'd brought more machines, more scanners. "We need to understand," they said. But nobody could explain the Miller effect. Jack had not done anything special. He had not spoken to anyone outside his cell. He had not used any technology. He had not done anything. And yet everything was changing. The prison planet remained the same. Gray rocks, gray sky, sharp wind. But inside Omega 9, a different world was growing. A world where people talked. A world where people listened. A world where people seemed more human. Dr. Rodriguez made her report to the Interstellar Judicial Council. "We cannot explain it," she wrote, "but something is happening. Something important." Jack Miller sat in his cell, quiet, calm, smiling. A smile that seemed to hold something more than anyone could understand. The 5th week in Omega 9 ended, and everything was different. The Interstellar Special Intervention Team arrived with serious faces and serious plans. 12 beings from 12 different star systems, each chosen for their ability to stay cold, stay calm, stay professional. They came with special equipment, special training, special everything. Their job was simple: stop whatever was happening in Omega 9. The team leader was Captain Yara. She was from a planet where showing emotion was considered weak. Her species had skin that changed color when they felt strong feelings. Right now, her skin was a perfect, calm gray. "We will solve this," she told Warden Jahoon. Jahoon just looked tired. "Good luck," he said. The intervention team began their work. They tested everything, scanned everything, checked everything. Jack Miller sat in his cell, watching, waiting, smiling. The first team member to change was a security expert named Krell. He was from a planet of stone-like beings. They were known for being hard, cold, never changing. Krell was interviewing a prisoner about the changes. The prisoner told a story about his daughter, about how he missed her, about how he wanted to be a better father. Something happened to Krell. He started to listen, really listen. His stone-like skin began to show small cracks, cracks that looked like something softer. The other team members noticed. "What is happening to you?" they asked. Krell could not explain. Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell, quiet, calm, smiling. By the second day, half the intervention team showed signs of change. They talked more. They listened more. They seemed more alive. Captain Yara tried to stop it. She used every trick she knew. But nothing worked. The prison continued to change. Prisoners learned new skills. Guards showed kindness. People talked. People listened. "This makes no sense," Captain Yara said. Jack Miller just sat in his cell, watching, waiting, smiling. The intervention team brought more machines, more scanners, more everything. But they could not stop the changes. Dr. Rodriguez watched everything. She took notes. She recorded every small detail. "It's like he's doing nothing," she told Captain Yara. And yet, everything is changing. The prison had rules, strict rules. But something was happening that no one could control. Krell began to tell stories about his home planet, about the hard life there, about the cold people. "I want to be different," he said. The other team members listened. Jack Miller remained in his cell, sitting, smiling. A smile that seemed to hold something more than anyone could understand. The intervention team meetings became different. They used to be cold, formal, strict. Now they talked, shared stories, listened to each other. "We cannot explain this," Captain Yara said. But she was smiling too. The prison planet remained the same. Gray rocks, gray sky, sharp wind. But inside Omega 9, a different world was growing. A world where people connected. A world where people understood. A world where people seemed more human. Days passed. The intervention team stopped trying to stop the changes. They started to understand them. Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell, quiet, calm, changing everything, without doing anything at all. Dr. Young-Soo sat in the research room. Papers were everywhere. Screens showed graphs, charts, numbers. But numbers could not explain everything. "Humans are different," she said to herself. Jack Miller had been in Omega 9 for 1 month. Just 1 month. And everything had changed. The research showed strange things. Things that made no sense. Prisoners were learning. Guards were changing. People were connecting. Dr. Young-Soo understood something important, something big. Humans had a power that no one understood. The power was not in weapons, not in technology, not in force. The power was in something else. Connection, understanding, kindness. Jack Miller sat in his cell, quiet, calm, watching, always smiling. That small smile. Dr. Young-Soo looked at the research. She saw things no one else saw. Prisoners who hated each other now talked. Guards who were cold now listened. People who were alone now felt connected. "It's not what he does," she told Warden Jaehoon. "It's what he is." Jack Miller was just a human. A simple human. But humans were special. Very special. In the prison yard, prisoners did new things. They learned. They shared. They helped each other. A prisoner named Kim was learning to read. Another was learning math. A third was drawing pictures. "We never did this before," the guard said. Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell, watching, waiting, smiling. Dr. Young-Soo's research showed something amazing. Happiness increased. Conflict dropped. People listened. People understood. "Humans have something," she wrote in her report, "something we cannot measure." The Interstellar Judicial Council read her words. They did not understand. But they were listening. Jack Miller remained in his cell, quiet, calm, changing everything, without doing anything. Dr. Young-Soo looked deeper. She studied Jack's background, his life before prison. He was a simple cargo ship worker, nothing special. But humans were not simple. Humans were complex. Humans could change everything. In Omega 9, the prison was becoming something else. A place of learning. A place of understanding. A place of hope. Jack Miller sat in his cell, watching the change, smiling. a smile that held something more. The research continued. The changes continued. And Jack Miller, he just continued to exist. Quietly, calmly, changing the universe, one small smile at a time. Omega 9 was not a prison anymore. It had become something else, something nobody could explain. The walls looked the same, gray and hard. The prison planet remained unchanged. Sharp rocks, empty sky, cold wind. But inside, everything was different. Jack Miller continued to sit in his cell. Quiet, calm, smiling. The changes were big now, not small anymore. Big changes that everyone could see. Prisoners learned new skills. They studied. They talked. They understood each other. Guards became teachers, helpers, listeners. This is not how prisons work, the old rules said. But nobody was listening to the old rules anymore. A prisoner named Lee learned to read. He was 60 years old. He had been in prison for 30 years. Nobody had ever helped him learn before. Now a guard named Min Ki helped him. "I want to read my daughter's letters," Lee said. Min Ki helped him learn. Another prisoner learned math. Another learned to draw. Another learned to write stories. The prison library, which used to be empty, was now full. People read books. People shared books. People talked about books. Jack Miller watched from his cell. Always sitting. Always calm. Always smiling. Dr. Rodriguez made new reports. New charts. New everything. Prisoner rehabilitation rates went up. Conflict went down. Learning went up. Understanding went up. The Interstellar Judicial Council did not know what to do. A prison was not supposed to be like this. A prison was supposed to be hard, cold, strict. But Omega 9 was different. Jack Miller remained in his cell, the most secure cell in the most secure prison. But he was changing everything, without doing anything. Guards who used to be strict now listened. Prisoners who used to fight now talked. People who used to be alone now connected. "How is this happening?" they asked. Nobody could explain. Jack just sat, watching, waiting, smiling. The stories began to spread. Other prisons heard about Omega 9. Other planets heard about Omega 9. The whole galaxy started to hear about Omega 9. A prison where people learned. A prison where people changed. A prison where hope lived. Dr. Yang Su continued her research. "Humans are different," she wrote. "Humans can change everything." Jack Miller did not speak much. He did not do much. He just existed. But in his existence, he changed everything. The prison cafeteria was different now. People talked. People shared food. People listened to each other. Old enemies became friends. Old hatreds disappeared. "We are learning," prisoners said. "We are understanding," guards said. Jack Miller watched. Always calm. Always quiet. Always smiling. That small smile. A smile that held something more than anyone could understand. The prison was becoming a school. A place of learning. A place of hope. Jack Miller remained in his cell. The most secure cell. In the most secure prison. Changing everything. Without doing anything at all. Just by being human. Jack Miller was transferred to a new place. A different prison. But it did not matter. The change had already happened. Omega 9 was not the same anymore. The entire galaxy was not the same anymore. People began to understand something new about humans. Humans were different. Very different. Dr. Yang Su wrote a report. A big report. A report that would change everything. "Humans have a power," she wrote. "A power that cannot be measured." The Interstellar Judicial Council read her words carefully. They did not understand everything, but they were listening. In Omega 9, the changes continued. Prisoners learned. Guards helped. People connected. Jack Miller's new prison was just like the old one. He sat in his cell. Quiet. Calm. Smiling. That small smile. a smile that held something more than anyone could understand. The stories spread across the galaxy. A prison where people change. A prison where hope lived. A prison where understanding grew. Prisoners who used to hate each other now talked. Guards who used to be cold now listened. People who were alone now felt connected. Something is different, people said. Jack Miller moved between prisons, but the change followed him. Like a light, like a wave, like something alive. Dr. Rodriguez continued her research. The numbers showed amazing things. Happiness increased. Conflict dropped. Learning went up. Understanding grew. It's not what he does, she told everyone. It's what he is. Jack Miller was just a human. A simple human. But humans were special. Very special. In prisons across the galaxy, things began to change. People started to learn. People started to listen. People started to understand. Jack Miller sat in his cell, watching, waiting, smiling. The Interstellar Judicial Council met many times. They talked about Jack Miller. They talked about humans. They tried to understand. We cannot explain it, they said. But they were changing too. Jack Miller continued to exist. Quietly, calmly, changing everything. Without doing anything. Just by being human. The final report was simple. We discovered something important, it said. The most powerful thing in the universe might be a human's ability to connect. The most dangerous weapon might be kindness. The most strong force might be understanding. Jack Miller sat in his cell, a small smile on his face, a smile that held the power to change worlds. The galaxy looked different now. Prisons were different. People were different. Everything was different. All because of one human. One simple human. Sitting, watching, smiling. Jack Miller had changed everything. Without doing anything. Just by being human. Asterisk. End of transmission. Asterisk.